Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our July 20th edition of a Preccelerator University workshop. Today we have one of our star mentors and a person that I always learn something from when I hear Sari speak. She's a brilliant person, and we're very fortunate to have her not only as a speaker today, but as a mentor at the Preccelerator. Sari is working with Alpha Data Strategies as a consultant, doing business strategy consulting. She focuses on using data to drive business decision making. I'm not going to read her whole profile because I think it's online. But without further ado, please help me welcome Sari Kern.
Thank you, Len. Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here. I know it's lunch, so I'm going to preface this with there's no obligation to be on screen. You know, you're here, it's your time. It does help me if I can see your faces and interact. So if you are engaged, thank you, Bennett. Love it. It does help me as a presenter. I was, you'll find out I have a diverse background. I'll touch a little bit about that, but one of them was acting. And I was much better on the stage and in theater, like small black box, than I was on camera. So thank you all again for being here. I'm Sari Kern. My company is Alpha Data Strategies, and we work with companies to get them to use data to drive better decision making and increase their profitability and achieve their goals. So this workshop is going to provide you with 5 steps. And it's going to be a system that you can follow and replicate anytime you want to use a data-driven process to make a decision. And we'll provide some skills. Mostly it's going to be around the strategy of using data and getting you to cultivate and get that mind shift from that gut instinct decision-making to a let's use information, find out what's there, and then make a decision based on that. I teach a course at Pepperdine for full-time MBA students. And this is kind of the abridged version of that. That's a 2-day intensive course, but I think you'll get the biggest points out of this. And I do hope that you'll be able to take some of this back and use it immediately in your businesses, which I'm going to hear about in a little bit. I'm going to ask those of you who are willing to let me know who you are and what you do and how you use data currently. And really this is to provide clear-cut ways to help you achieve your goals. And please, it's a small group, ask questions, bring up examples. If you have any particular examples from your experience or anything you're working on right now, feel free to bring it up and we can kind of work through it together. Any questions before we start? Cool. So I'm Sari Kern. I have my registered nurse's license. So if you ever see anywhere I put my initials, it's RN MBA. And that was one of my career pivots, which actually provided a lot of insights in how I look at companies and how I look at data. But it all started back. My first career was a diving safety officer. Are any of you guys scuba divers? Yeah, we got a few. Okay, great. So I was at University of Miami and I started out in marine biology and was certain that I was going to be like the world's first dolphin trainer who could speak dolphin. And realized very quickly that really I just wanted to be in the water. And so I got the first degree I could to graduate and volunteered and then worked at the diving safety office. And my boss, his name was Rick Gomez. And I remember my first day there, I had my stab jacket, I had my regulator, I had all this stuff going on. And his stuff was different. It was weird. He had a long hose wrapped around his neck. He had his octopus hanging around his neck on a bungee cord. Instead of having the regular stab jacket that most of us see, he had a back plate and wings. And I was like, dude, what is all that stuff? Like, why does your equipment look so different? And he's like, well, why is your regulator the way it is? I'm like, I don't know. I was PADI trained. That's what they taught me. You know, this was in the book. And this was the first time I'd ever really heard this. And that's, have a reason for why you're doing things, not just because it's the way we've always done it, not just because that's what I was taught, not just because, but have a real information, data-driven reason for how you do things and why you do things. And that really stuck with me. So he had reasons. He had a long 6-foot hose around his neck because he said, if you ever actually get into a problem with someone underwater, they're not going to wait for you to hand them their octopus, which may have been dragging in the sand. They're going to reach for that thing right out of your mouth and take it away from you. So you should have enough hose to be able to get them far enough that they can breathe and calm down, and they're not going to rip anything else off or jerk you to the surface. And if your hands are busy, you should be able to reach down and get your octopus. So from there, I won't go through all the details, but as a nurse, that was data-driven too. It was very much evidence-based practice is what they call it in medicine and nursing. You should have reasons for why you give medications. You should have reasons for how you position the patient. And so that spoke very clearly to me, especially because I worked in emergency and trauma. So patients would come in and you would have a lot of different kinds of data. So you would have the vital signs, you would have the blood work, you would have the doctor barking orders, you would have the heart rate going and the EKG monitor on. You would have the patient screaming in the corner. You would have a leg gushing blood. So you have to be able to filter through the noise of the shit that doesn't matter, filtered. And because I was an ER nurse, I have a really foul mouth. So I apologize in advance to anyone. I will try to scale it back, but I do have a foul mouth. And I hope that doesn't offend anybody. So you have to be able to filter through the stuff that doesn't matter, like the blood squirting and the family screaming, and focus in on the things that are important. What is the data? What is the information? And this drove me through my nursing career. And then it started translating to business, because as a nurse, I was always working short-staffed, not getting my breaks, working vacations, and trying to find ways to make all of us as nurses happier and not get burned out. And eventually went into management and director. I ran an ICU and I ran an ER and worked on staffing models. And how do we get nurses to be happier? And how do we get them to take better care of patients? Because it really starts with taking care of your staff, right? And then I started working for startups where I really had an impact on the company as a whole. And I said to my mentor at the time, I said, I think I'm going to go back to school and get my master's in nursing, because I think, I might want to go and be a CNO or a chief nursing officer or a CEO at a hospital. And he looked at me, he's like, dude, what you're doing right now is all business. Go to school, get your MBA and focus on that. And I am so glad I did, because it really took all of these experiences that I had. And I wasn't just a nurse. Before I was a nurse, I was a butt wiper. Like, I was on the orthopedic floor and I cleaned people for a living, which is really hard work and very thankless work in the long run. And it teaches you a lot, because you're working on the bottom and you're working your way up. I worked my way up to a nurse. I worked my way up to a manager and a director, and eventually, a head of strategy at a healthcare company. But it gets you to see things from a different light too. So I'm not going to keep going on about myself. I do care a lot about philanthropies. If you're into that, reach out to me separately. I'd love to hear what you're passionate about. I have 2 sons, Kai, who is almost 6, and Bodhi, who is a pandemic baby. So that was interesting. He'll be 13 months. And then, like I said, I went to University of Miami. I went to Pepperdine. I actually, because I went back to school so many times through so many different careers, I probably was in school for 16 years of college or something crazy like that, but I digress. So I want to hear about you guys, those of you who are not busy eating and want to talk. I'd love to hear your name, where you are, what company you're working for, and what you're hoping to get out of this workshop. Anyone want to raise their hand?
Bennett will.
Thanks, Bennett.
Thanks, Len. Hey, Sari. Good to see you. Good to see everybody here.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So I'm Bennett. I work for a company called Marsh McLennan Agency. It's a consulting firm for health insurance and overall all types of insurance. But the reason that I am here is because I also am a co-founder of a startup called Blockforms that is a part of the Preccelerator through Stubs. And the reason we started Blockforms is because forms are terrible. And I work in an insurance world that is heavily inundated with forms, and people spend a lot of their workday pushing the same data across the same PDF documents, and it drives me crazy. And we developed a technology that streamlines that so people can interact with people and not forms going forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Bennett. Ellie or Eric, can I pressure either of you to jump in and speak?
Or Karen Campbell will also, I'm sure.
Well, okay, as long as you're pressuring me to speak. As you can see, by the way, I'm actually physically at the Preccelerator.
I see that.
Here, I'll show you. Len is over there. Yeah, so look, I have a pretty good idea what Sari does. Sari is in my provisors group, as is Eric. And we spend a lot of time together learning about this person that we fondly refer to as the data dominatrix. And I'm here basically just to support you, Sari, and to see what I can learn that I haven't learned in the past. I'm a mentor here at the Preccelerator. I'm a consulting chief financial officer for startup companies, and I run a really great provisors group. And the reason it's great is because of people like Eric and Sari. So.
Thanks, Ellie.
Eric,
Thanks so
I guess you have to go next.
All right, mouthful of food. So I'm not turning my camera on.
You don't have to go if you don't want to.
Well,
I'll push you a little bit.
One of the things that I've looked at in terms of my business and data, and in the end, didn't feel like it was worth the time, was going from initial request for non-disclosure agreement, because I do essentially research and development work, to contract approval signature. And what is the duration between those two? And then looking at that, what are the factors that cause the window between those two to expand? And in the end, I pretty much figured out the less sophisticated, less experienced clients who have not gone through the research and development, product development process before, inevitably take a lot more hand-holding through the entire process from non-disclosure to consulting agreement signature. And so intuitively, I backed off on the extremely less sophisticated prospects for my business and moved up the food chain a little bit, if you will, to those that have some level of experience. And it's gone much smoother. And I could see the duration between those two key milestones shortening without a ton of data, but I'm sure I could have done it better if I had your help. So that's my 2 cents here.
That's awesome, Eric. Thank you for sharing. So the next thing I'd want to assess, just by a show of hands, if you want to raise your hand in the app, how many of you consider yourselves to be more gut instinct driven in your decisions? We've got Len, Bennett. Okay, I'm not seeing a whole lot of others. Okay, Eric. And how many of you believe that you take more of a data-driven approach to your everyday decision-making and or business? Okay, so the participation on this was pretty low, but we're gonna move on. The structure of this workshop is we're gonna look at the 5 steps. So the 5 steps are to focus, discover, organize, visualize, and strategize. And you'll see also, as this is ongoing, you're constantly reassessing and taking into account any additional data that's coming your way. So it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. I truly believe this. There are two factors that contribute to the outcome of a decision. Does anyone want to offer what they think they are?
And this is for the outcome of the decision or the making of the decision?
The outcome. So there are two factors that'll say whether it was successful or unsuccessful when you make a decision. So the first one is we have the decisions that we're making and the actions that we're taking. So that is the first one. What we do as a person, a company, to make the decision. What is the action we're going to take? The other one is the environment. So for example, you have the stock market, you have what your competitors are doing, you have a pandemic hitting, you have natural disasters, all of these things that we don't have control over, but they can impact how things turn out. So we only have control over one of these factors, which is the decisions that we make. So we want to make, and we have to make, the best decisions possible. So how do we do that? We use data. Data has the power to give us key insights into the health of business and guide solutions to problems. And that's why we're here. So what is data? You will hear me say the word data over and over and over again. My family hears it. It drives them crazy. Every time I get on the phone with my brother, he goes, "Oh, are you going to talk about data again?" Yes, I am. It's important. But what is it? Any definitions want to be offered? Len, you're on mute.
Yeah, those things that can be measured.
Great. Anyone else? Okay.
I guess this is the same thing as Len, but it has to be numbers, basically, right?
Okay. Does it?
I don't know. I think it does. I mean,
so
how do you derive conclusions from non-numerical information?
Well, we're starting with not the conclusions, but we're starting with just the information. Data is information, and it can exist anywhere and everywhere. It's just pieces of information. When you talk about business data, you're talking about the data that's generated by the day-to-day operations of the business. So it's just
to interrupt you, and I'm not disputing this, but I had a boss, actually, Rich Abronson's father, Chuck Abronson. I worked for him for 7 years at ESOP, and he used to tell me, "Don't give me data, give me information." And in his mind, there was a clear distinction between data and information. Data is that which you derive information from. Information is when you take the data, and again, you know, you're the data expert. But information is the knowledge and the conclusions and where the data takes you. So, in my mind, at least, from Chuck Abronson, there is a real difference between data and information. If you want to dispute that and tell me I'm full of shit, that's fine. I'm happy to have you.
Well, I'm certainly not going to say you're full of shit, Ellie, but for the purposes of the workshop, the way I personally define data, and also are any of you familiar with the expression DRIP?
No.
It means data rich, information poor. So this concept has been birthed out of the fact that we have so much data that is living in so many places, but we're not gleaning information from it because we're not using it appropriately. We're not organizing it. We're not visualizing it. We're not using it to make decisions. So the expression data-rich, information poor comes from the idea that we have all this data that's generated purposefully, not purposefully, inadvertently, and it lives in a lot of different forms. It could be numbers, it could be information living in the heads of the employees. It can be anything. It can be temperature, it could be color. It's all data. But what we want is we don't care about every single piece of data. We want to take data and find the information that's in it that's going to drive the decision making. So, well, I mean, there's probably a lot of different people who define data a lot of different ways. And I think that your insights are awesome, Ellie. For the purposes of this workshop, let's try to focus on this definition of data. Sound good? Cool.
So, sorry, if we look at just like COVID as an example of having a lot of data, very data rich. I mean, we have more numbers than what we know what to do with, but people aren't believing it. So the information is poor. It absolutely describes what's going on, I think, in society today, where people are not looking at the data either seriously or not trusting it or misinterpreting it. And that might be a great example of having too much to tell a simple story.
Yes, and we will get to that too. I mean, we can look at Excel spreadsheets up the yin yang, and spreadsheets won't tell us the story. We have to have it affect us. And you could have a beautiful visualization that tells a story, but if it doesn't affect you and it doesn't hit that part that hurts you and pushes or pulls you to make that decision, it's irrelevant. So you have to take this information, you have to take this data, you need to organize it and visualize it. And I'll get to all those steps and we'll cover all of them. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but yeah.
Oh, I didn't know I was online. Could I just say something?
Sure, please.
About data and information, to your point, and clarify. My first career my career follows yours very similar, in a similar fashion. I was in healthcare. I was a speech pathologist. And
oh, how cool.
Thank you. And what I wanted to say, on a side where I went to business, is I began to work with professional athletes, NFL teams, NBA teams in the area of communication, sports psychology. And I realized I was running a business just like you. So I just kind of fell into it like a client, you know, like you do in healthcare, like one client at a time, and then something happens. So, and then I'm developing areas right now for software and philanthropy that I'll give you my name and we can talk about later. But what I learned as a speech therapist is that we had to, like, say a child or a patient couldn't say the R sound or L sound or didn't have a voice. We had to keep data on every time that person could do something and then when they couldn't do something. And when we got the data, then we might know, like he said, the R sound, the L sound, 3 out of 10 times. Why isn't he doing better? Then I take the data to look at the information on therapy and treatment to know these are the next things that I can try. They may not work, but I'm going to give him a shot to see if I can increase his articulation skills. So that's where I think the intersection of data and information comes in, that bridge that allows you to take the data, perceive it as information, and make decisions from that. It's not separate, it's one thing. And I found that last summer I went and got a grant to go to a data school for 3 months. And I realized why I've slowed down in building my business is I need to understand the data before I can go on and build a healthy business. Because I know that from my prior experience. So that's what I'm looking to learn today. So thank you.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Karen. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. So before we move on, does anyone else, I mean, I love the debate and the back and forth. I could talk about this shit all day. So if anyone else has anything that they want to share about data versus information and where we find it. Good? Awesome. So the first step when you start looking at data and having a data-driven practice is really important, and it is focus. If you're all over the place and you have spielkes about what your goals are and where you're going to be getting information, you're never going to get to the other side. You're going to get analysis paralysis. You're going to have way too much information, and most of it's not going to be pertinent. So take a second, breathe, and focus. What is the problem? What is the goal? And from there, so rather than looking at the data first and then figuring this out, you start with the problem and then figure out what data is needed to solve these problems or achieve this goal. So you can, the problem or goal could be a few different things. One is an acute business problem. For example, decreased sales. So you have a problem that's happening right now and you want to solve it. That's one way of narrowing your focus, and you're going to collect data according to that. Another one is a long-term vision. Like you want to expand your market share. And so you're going to collect data and trend data according to that. And then the other one would be goals, like increased profitability or operational efficiency. And this is really where KPIs come into play. And we'll talk a little bit about key KPIs or key performance indicators. So here's an example. Company 1. A company's vision is to create the best product for a small niche of consumers. Anyone want to contribute what kind of metrics we might look at? So I'll provide some examples. And if you want to chime in, feel free.
Competitive reference.
Great.
Customer service data about rejects, problem products, any other governmental regulatory requirements, any other key industry trends. Those would all be helpful.
Yes. And if you were to narrow that down to 1 or 2, Eric, what do you think you would pick?
Well, it's always tough. I look at competitive environments and say that it's important, but it's looking in the rear view mirror. It's not looking forward. So looking forward and doing market research to understand what's going on in the world. When I taught at Pepperdine, I used to say, you know, what's wrong with the world? To look for those opportunities. So forward-thinking trends, forward-looking trends, I think are more important than competitive and even more important than sales history. But if I had to rank them, I would say forward-looking trends, number 1, sales history, number 2, and then competitive would be number 3.
That's awesome. And Eric, for anyone who doesn't know, Eric Rose is probably the guy who would be able to create the best product for someone. So this was written for Eric Rose. And yes to those. The only feedback I would give is that we're narrowing the goal. So, and we're talking about a small niche. They want best product, small niche. So that tells us we can filter out some information. We're probably not going to be as focused on financials. We're probably not going to be focused as much on sales. So in order to offset that, you would talk about pricing strategies and things like that. And you would be working on a very targeted market research. You wouldn't be going and pulling the market research for, you know, the product that is, or all the different products that would be aimed at a lot of different types of consumers. You would really, really want to focus this drive. Would you agree with that, Eric?
Yes, especially when you're in a niche market. Yeah, so hyper-focused, small market, like you say, I'd rather sell fewer units at a lot higher margins when I'm looking at that kind of a market. Yes.
Yeah. And you want to have the best product. So you're more focused on the R&D and all that stuff.
Yeah. And really even maybe doing ethnographic research to make sure we truly understand the pain points, the anguish in the market.
Awesome. Thank you. So company number 2, a large hospital system aims to improve patient satisfaction scores. All my healthcare workers out there, what are some things that we would want to collect to understand if we're improving patient satisfaction scores or how we do that?
Are you asking what the process is to collect the data, or
no, just some data you would want to look at, assuming you have access to all the data in the world? What would you want to look at?
Did you leave the hospital in better shape than what you came in?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, simple as that. Did you get healed? Did you heal quickly? Did you get good care? Were people respectful?
Yes.
Yes. I guess you're saying that you'd like to have that in an exit interview survey and take the data from the exit interview survey to see how to increase your hospital satisfaction rate.
Sure. Yeah, the world is your oyster. We'll talk about how to collect the data in a minute, but what kind of data would we want? So we would want to know patient satisfaction. We would want to know patient outcomes. We would maybe want to look at length of stay and see if there's any correlations between length of stay in the hospital, which there are. And then throughput, you know, are people getting stuck in different parts of the system, and staff interviews and staff satisfaction. All those things might contribute to how a patient perceives their care in the hospital. And again, you're probably not going to look at financials for this. You're probably not going to be looking at like equipment and supplies data. You're going to be focusing on the patient. It's going to be very patient-centric, that kind of data. Okay, last example. We've got a B2B product manufacturing company looking to increase profitability. So now we are talking about financials, right? So anyone want to give a couple examples of data they would want to see?
Pricing comparisons to competition.
Great.
I tend to look at manufacturing costs. A dollar saved in the manufacturing, you know, could be equal to $5 at retail. And to get a $5 retail sale could be more difficult than trying to save, you know, a little bit of money in the manufacturing. So I'd want to look at the manufacturing costs.
Yes, and on top of that, operational costs, which just get stacked right on top of that. You've got your main operations. And if you're looking at product costs too, it's not going to do any good if your operational costs are exceeding, and it's unnecessary if they're exceeding the level at which profitability would be achieved. Sales data pricing, probably not going to look at this point at customer reports and product features and ratings and that kind of data. So we're going to filter that out, and we're going to focus on the financial stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, and this is really very closely related to what Eric said, but I'd want to be looking not just at manufacturing costs, but manufacturing efficiencies. I'd want to be looking at for example, where, to drill down a little farther, where can we, reduce labor hours per unit on different processes, where we can improve processes. That's one of your 4 Ps, right, Eric? The things that translate to and result in manufactured costs is that's where I would want to focus on the data.
Yeah.
So I think
where
Ellie
are their
might
bottlenecks?
Bottlenecks, exactly. Ellie might be thinking back to when we worked on a project and I took video of the manufacturing operation, 8 minutes of video, and we got to play it back and look at the data showing the inefficiencies in the manufacturing process. And that was very helpful to look at that, I would argue.
Yeah, you could look at if you have the ability to mine that data, you could look at how much time it takes different employees to do the same job, and then learn from the ones who take less time and teach that information to the ones who take more. That would lower your manufacturing costs, right?
Yeah. And that's a big thing of like when we work with companies too and look at operational efficiencies, where are the bottlenecks, but also who's doing it well and where have there been workarounds created? Like, are there workarounds and how long are they taking? Are they adding time? Are they subtracting time? Could things be better? And all that can be found. You have to drill down, like you said, Ellie, you have to drill down pretty far into the data. But it can be found and it can make a big difference on the bottom line. So it's important stuff. Thank you. So the next step is discovering. So we talked about what data would we want, and then next we're going to talk about data locations. So, and you know, originally focus, right? We have this goal, so that gives us an arrow to go towards. And now we go, okay, we want to collect this data. So identify that first. Now say, where is this data living? How can I collect it? But it's probably, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's already somewhere. It just is a matter of finding it, getting access to it, or converting something that's already there, or like on what's on here is calculations, kind of calculating how we get to that. So data lives everywhere, can live everywhere. Sales reports, customer reports, financials, we mentioned all these. Key information. You want to spend your time finding the data that will provide insights and avoid distractions. This kind of reiterates the focus piece. But for example, if you have found that the most valuable clients for your company come from word of mouth referrals, don't dive into the analysis of the most efficient social media channels. Just don't. You know that your business is word of mouth. Don't waste your effing time on that other stuff. And then calculations, some examples. So I have a favorite. My favorite thing to do with clients is to figure out their profitability by product or service. And it's not an easy calculation, but it's already living in, you kind of combine the financials, you combine it with, you know, if time is money and you've got consultants, you've got people working on these projects or services, then you look at payroll. And you take all these little pieces and you get the unit economics, and that gives a lot of insight once you get the cost or the profitability per product or service, because then you can adjust pricing strategies and you can remove products that are losing you money. And I'll show you a visual example of a company I worked with where their highest revenue generating project was also losing them money. Every single time they sold that service, they lost money. And so that was really insightful in being able to make a change. And we can produce financials at the touch of a button, but that's not the end of it. You have to organize it in a way and show it, visualize it in a way that tells a story. And that brings it. So the other thing, I'm going to come back to that, but for this slide, what data do you have access to? Because that's another big piece of the puzzle. You may be like, yeah, I need to look at everybody's salaries so I can, you know, calculate what our cost per unit is. And well, you don't have access to everybody's salaries because you're not an HR and you're not the CEO. So making sure that you're also trying to either work with the data you have access to or present a case for why additional data would be helpful, and identifying which of the data would be helpful.
And understanding what data you need. You may not need the individual salaries for everybody in the company, but you might need the gross number. And just do simple mathematics from the gross number.
Yes. Thank you, Len. Yeah, that's a great point. Like, what is the rolled in cost per hour or something like that? Exactly. And then how do you make your case? Well, you have to go back and, you know, make your case with data also, you know, hey, I could find out this really important piece of information, but I'm going to need access to this, and kind of compel your audience and tell a story. So when you're organizing data, you want to consider the visualization, and this part gets super technical. Most companies I work with are not doing this piece. This is usually what we're brought in to do, which is there's basically two options. One is they have data living in a bunch of different areas, but it's all in platforms that are smart, and they're able to export all the information into, I use Tableau personally, but Power BI or whatever you use to visualize things. And then you don't necessarily have to go in and do the Excel piece, but I'd say 80% of our clients, we actually have to pull all their data from different places and put it into a master spreadsheet in Excel, which sucks. That is like the most time-consuming part of what I do. But it is so valuable because once you have a spreadsheet that has all of this information in there, you are able to glean so many different kinds of insights, and you're able to create visualizations from even simple visualizations, like what lives in Excel itself. And Excel is, just so you know, Excel and pivot tables, those are not powerful visualization tools. Those are very, very basic, but you can still get some information there. And usually what we do is after we organize all this information and we create this master spreadsheet and we have information pulling and we've made we found some insights and we figured out KPIs and all that, we'll create a custom dashboard. So we can then have all the information sent to a URL where the client is able to click and see their dashboard with all their living data, which is pretty cool. That's super fun part. But it takes a lot of setup to get there. So if any of you have any data pieces, because this is so technical, if you want to reach out to me and I can help guide you in a way, or help you set up your spreadsheet for success, I'm happy to do that. Just reach out via email or call me, because I could not cover this in a workshop. But the next part is my favorite. Let's visualize. So first, KPIs. How many of you guys know what KPIs, key performance visual indicators, are? Raise your hand if you can. Okay, very few people know what a KPI is. So the KPIs are aligning with the company goals and reflect on the health of an organization. So profitability would not be your KPI. The major contributors to the profitability are what are going to be your KPIs. For example, if you are a services company and you are paying people for their time to provide the services, then the more efficiently people are able to do their work, the fewer number of hours to get the same work done, that's going to be your KPI. And you always want to set up benchmarks, but it should be driving your decision or your the success of your company, and usually profitability. I really like working on the profitability side. So here's another example. You have an architecture firm. Clients really want projects finished as quickly as possible. So you're going to track the time for identified bottlenecks. We talked about bottlenecks, and encourage some staff to figure out some solutions. And you're going to figure out what types of projects or why or what's taking longer for other projects and try to get it lower. You want to tell a story when you have the visualizations. It should have a pretty catchy headline. You should use appropriate colors, and I could teach a whole nother class on that. But it shouldn't just be, okay, here's our sales over the last year. Okay. It would be sales are increasing. You say sales are increasing and look how much they're increasing by. And this is, despite having not invested any more money in the company. And so it should tell a story, and it should relate to your goal or your vision. And finally, discovering insights. You probably don't have the end in mind when you start visualizing and you start creating charts and graphs. You're probably starting with, okay, is there there? It's a lot of theirs. And where is it? Is there a seasonality thing? Is there something going on with the time of day that patients are visiting clinics? And you usually can't see it just from numbers in a spreadsheet. You have to see it in this beautiful, colorful chart or graph. And you can exploit things really well when you discover insights that way, and it takes less time. So here's an example of a visualization. You've got a pie graph. This is great to illustrate distributions over a given period of time. So you can clearly see that for what we have here, which would be some diagnoses for patients. This was actually a visualization I used for the 4th of July because I'm morbid like that. My assistant was like, oh, let's talk about the food that people ate on 4th of July. And I'm like, I'm vegan. I don't want to talk about that kind of food. Let's talk about people getting hurt, because that's what people are interested in. So as you can see, on 4th of July, most of the ER complaints are burns, and you can clearly see that. So next we have bar graphs. So bar graphs can either show trends over time or compare different elements on the same scale, kind of like the pie chart. This one on the left is showing the average number of days per order per month. So this was a client I worked with, and it was one of the things that they didn't realize was that it was taking them a lot longer to deliver their products to their clients. And even though they had increased sales and that was super exciting, they weren't realizing, like, by the end, it was taking over 550 days on average to deliver their product when it started at about 20 days. Yeah, Len.
Going back to that last graph.
Yeah.
It tells a story for a certain point of time, but it doesn't give you any comparison to the 5th of July as to whether the number of burns is relevant to the 4th of July. You can make that inference, but it doesn't really tell the whole story that on the 4th of July, the number of burns substantially increases compared to the 3rd or the 5th.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
How data is presented, I guess the point is, what I'm making is how data is presented as part of the story, not just the data itself.
Mm-hmm. And if you were going to look at, let's say, over the month of July, how many people came in with burns, you would look at it in a bar graph, and I would hypothesize that July 4th would be, you know, way up at the top, and it would stick out like a sore thumb compared to all others. Right. And that would be a different way of visualizing it. Exactly, Len. Thank you. And this bar graph on the right shows the average number of days per order type. So they had 4 different order types. They had normal, they had model, they had reorder, and rework. And it's showing how long on average for this period of time. I think it was a year. Over the period of a year, what was the average period of time? So it doesn't show the increasing, to Len's point. It doesn't show that it's taking longer and longer and longer the more time goes by and the more sales they have. But instead, it's just showing, okay, our normal delivery is way slower than a rework. Maybe interesting, maybe not, depending on their goals. If they're trying to be the fastest turnaround product service ever, then they're going to want to trend and see if they're getting better or worse. And then we have a line graph. Line graphs are awesome for comparing different elements over time. So this is actually two different, I worked with an HR company and gave a presentation to them recently. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was how to use data for HR. So this graph shows a reactive compensation strategy inflates salaries. This is at a specific company. It's not broad applying or anything. You're not supposed to take any information out of this, but so it has a compelling title, and it's saying a reactive compensation strategy. So if you start hiring people just because they're asking, or giving people raises just because they're asking for it, the high performers are going to get more and more, but the low performers are going to get more too. And average is just kind of going to increase and hang out in this situation, but it's inflating the salary. So then you compare this graph to another line graph, and this one says a proactive compensation strategy encourages high performance and weeds out low performers. So you've got the low performers kind of like excusing them, like they've left the company. That's why the line stops. And you've got high performers going up steadily and average going up steadily. So it's a different way of showing trends. And it's, I think, easier to look at something like a line graph with different elements. So you've got the average, high performer, low performer, compared to a bar graph where you have the 3 different bars of the different colors. I feel like that doesn't tell, especially if you're talking about trends over time, it doesn't tell as good of a story. So I prefer to go with the line graphs there. This is a very simple sales conversion funnel. And this is another thing that companies are looking at. So they've got their marketing, their social media marketing, or whatever kind of marketing they're doing. And you've got target audience, and then the reach, and then you see the click-through. And you can very clearly see that the click-through rate, the number of times someone clicks on the article or the advertisement, is far less than the reach. But if they do click through, that's pretty good conversion to client there. So if you were working with this company and you were working on their data strategies, you would want to look and see, okay, how do we increase the click-through rate from the reach? How do we create content that's going to encourage more click-throughs? And not so much, okay, how do we broaden the audience, or how do we get it to reach more people? That's going to help you figure out your focus. This one on the left, and so graphs can also show correlations between two different metrics. And yes, I know correlation doesn't equal causation. That's a debate for another time. But it can help give dimension and identify correlations between different metrics. So this was a company I worked with that does coaching, and they wanted to show, okay, so the measures that they were taking in terms of how people self-identified their improvement, from a 2 to a 3 on average for a certain metric, performance metric. And then this was the sales of the company. Or the production, not the sales, excuse me, the production. So we have a 28,500% increase in production from May to December, just when they started this coaching process and they improved this aspect from a 2 to a 3. So it shows, okay, well, we think we contributed to your increased productivity, and therefore we think we did a good job. And so that can help tell the story and compel their audience. We delivered this to their client as a dashboard. So when they're at the end of their engagement with a client, they will submit these metrics, and they'll show the correlations. And then on the right, this is just another example of, so these are pricing analysis. This is something I did for a cannabis client. We were trying to figure out how to price their products on the market. And so we looked at the different segments and the different markets, and you can break things down in these powerful tools. I mentioned I use Tableau, just like this, but then you can, you have these numbers that might be pertinent, like average price. We don't necessarily need to see that in a graph because we need to know what that price is. But then you have graphs of the equivalent price. There's a lot of technicalities here, but bottom line is there's a lot of different ways to visualize information. This was for a clinic that I helped grow, an urgent care clinic, and we had an old staffing model. We had realized right around here that there was a plateau. It was a brand new clinic, and the capacity was much, much higher than this. So the idea was, how do we grow this clinic, and what are the barriers? What's this glass ceiling all about? And so this was to show the effects of a new staffing model. So we have the old staffing model, and then with the new staffing model, this is the number of patients per month in the clinic. So we could glean that the new staffing model had an effect on the number of patients. And then these are the census change percentage. So did it go up? Did it go down? What's the percent change? And that's just based on your coaching delta, meaning that was the variable that changed during this period. The staffing model. So how many nurses, how many MAs, how many, yeah. And finally, this is where you pull it all together. This is really one piece of information. This is one KPI that I worked with a client, and you pull it into a dashboard so that you can see the story. And the story is, you've got service E, which is represented in orange. Service E, this is the one I was talking about earlier, makes up the most revenue for that company, the most number of sales, the most revenue. But if you look at the graph in the middle, it's not profitable. It is losing the company money. How scary is that? Like, you're like, oh yeah, let's pour sales, like this product sells, this service sells, let's lean into it. And then you find out that it's the only product in your entire line of products or services losing you money. That's a bummer, but it's a good thing you found it. And then by doing this kind of an analysis, you can see, okay, well, we've got this little tiny service C. It's small in the dots, in the dot graph, and it's, can you guys see my mouse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you've got the tiny little sliver here. But look how profitable it is. It's 5 times more profitable. So you have a couple options with, you know, this is a dashboard, which is awesome. So you can kind of see how it changes, and you can monitor how the products are doing. But you can make decisions off of this, right? You can say, okay, we have to adjust our pricing strategies. We need to sell more service C. We need to get our sales team just all about service C. And we need to adjust our pricing strategies for service E. So we either need to find out that service E is a gateway drug to something else, which it does not seem to be because it is the highest in revenue, or we have to make it profitable. So.
It's really interesting, Sari. This reminds me of a 3-day workshop that I attended when I was still working for Madison Industries. They called it their 80-20 workshop. And they put everything into 4 quadrants. And all of the profitability, or most of the profitability, was in quadrant A, and they use different ways of identifying. I sent you the PowerPoint. You probably would find it very interesting. But like, they had quadrant A, or quadrant 1 was what they called the fort, which was long run, standard, big sales, and quadrant B, or rather 4, which was at the lower right hand, was the short run, special, small sales. And what they discovered is that by using this kind of data and really breaking down where the profitable business was, that by giving up on some sales, they became a lot more profitable. And like I said, I sent you the PowerPoint. I'd love you to take a look at it. We can chat about it if you like. It was fascinating. And a lot of this kind of speaks to that, although you're not using the quote unquote 80-20 verbiage here, but there's a lot of similarity.
Yeah, and for anyone who's not familiar with the 80-20 rule, it basically says that 20% of your customers will generally make up 80% of your revenue. It's a generalization. And so it's always interesting to look and see which customers are the biggest revenue drivers, and then how much money are you investing in those other customers that aren't the big revenue drivers. So that's a really interesting data point to look at as well. Thanks, Ellie. And I can't wait to look at that and nerd out with you on more data stuff. So finally, we have this information, we put it into pretty charts and graphs, and now we need to strategize. So trending the data is important. And if it's not already in your graph, so you're going to be showing historicals because you can't see the future. You can make some predictions. You can do a predictive analysis, and that's a whole nother thing that can be done. But you want to see over time, like if you've all of a sudden developed KPIs and you've said, okay, we're going to fix this problem of profitability because we are going to remove this bottleneck. You're going to want to track that and make sure that you guys can't hear my kids screaming in the background. Can you? We're good. Okay. You're going to want to make sure that the bottleneck is improving. The amount of time in that area for operations is decreasing, but also that it's having the impact you'd hoped for on the profitability. So you're going to want to trend both of those metrics. So the KPI and the goal, 2 separate things, and watch it over time. And you're also going to need to decide how long you're going to give yourself to get a strategy to work. Is it something that should take 6 months to make an adjustment, 1 year? You know, how long should it take? Should it be instantaneous? Because if you pivot too quickly, you don't give something a chance to work. And if you take too long, you've lost too much time. and you may need to make adjustments. Plus that factor, you know, the fact that there are environmental factors out there, it's not just your own decisions and it's not just what you do. You could do everything right, by the book, but if something new comes into play, it's going to totally throw off your whole analysis. It's going to throw off all your numbers. It's got to adjust your strategy. So this is a fluid and dynamic process where you have to keep taking these external factors into play and rolling them into your strategy. So once you figure out how long you're going to give yourself, try to stick to that unless something major comes your way, like a major COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so for those of you who are major gut instinct people, this is for you. You have to fill in ambiguities. Not everything lives in data, and this is something that makes my heart palpitate every time I think that I don't have control and I don't have data for everything. That's just who I am. So you have to fill in those ambiguities, and that's where the killer gut instinct comes into play. So get the data first, at least understand where you're going, and then be like, okay, well, I think that for this thing we can't quantify, I think it's going to be like this. So let's make the strategy, adjust the strategy this way. Another example is, let's see. If you, okay, so you know you want to go somewhere, you know you want to do something for the company, and you know it's risky. Even if you know you're going to go that way, don't you want to know what your percentage of success is? So take the data you have, and before you just dive off head first and go in that direction, at least understand if you have a 50% chance of success or a 10% chance of success or a 1% chance of success. And from there, you can do things like decision trees to help you decide if it's worth taking that direction. And I could do a whole nother workshop on decision trees. Those are fun. And finally, you're going to develop strategy with all these things rolled in. But you do get to use your killer gut instinct. So for all of you who don't get anxiety over that, there is hope, even in data-driven strategies. So putting it all together, here is our wheel to drive with data. And you start with focus, you go to discover, you finally organize all this data to put it into a visualization, a chart or a graph or something really pretty. And then you get to make decisions about the strategy and how long and follow it. And then from there, it's ongoing. It's a dynamic process. So keep reassessing and keep going through this exercise. And Len, I didn't know if you wanted to stop right here at an hour, or I have probably another 5 or 10 minutes I could tack on to the back end if you'd like.
I go for it. Okay.
So one of my other careers before, I was a professional poker player. Not on WSOP or anything shiny, but I played 2-4 limit hold'em in the casinos with no bankroll and eventually made money out of it. But how many of you know the difference between poker and chess as it comes to strategy? Anyone want to take a stab at it?
Well, chess, you see all the
poker players here.
Chess, you see all the pieces on the board. Okay.
Any chess players?
In chess, you don't bluff.
So chess, all of the information is right there.
Right.
Because it's just about the pieces and where they move on the board. It is all the information just lives right there. So there is no ambiguity. If you lose, you made a mistake, period.
Right.
The winner made all the right decisions in that game. Poker, you have cards, you have information about the players you're playing against. You have a bankroll, you have cards that are coming out that you share depending on what kind of poker you're playing. I'm assuming Hold'em. And there's a lot of ambiguities. You don't know what the other players are holding. You don't know how much I don't know, you don't know what cards are coming out. There's a lot of ambiguity there. So you may make the best decisions in poker and still have an outcome that's not favorable. You may make a horrible decision at poker and you may win a huge hand. So business is a lot more like poker. And that kind of brings us to luck versus skill. So when you analyze the outcome of a decision you've made, of a data-driven decision, take into account luck and skill rather than looking at the outcome to analyze your decisions, because you're going to have so many small decisions to make. And over the long run, if you use a data-driven strategy, you are exponentially increasing your chances of success. But you're going to have a lot of decisions to make, and they're not all going to work out the way you wanted them to, because there's a lot that's not in our control. So look at the decision-making process. Don't look at the out. Don't be like, oh, well, I made this decision and I made $1 million. No, look at how you made the decision, and that will make you a better decision maker. So did you make the best decision with the information you had at your fingertips? Or did you possibly have some bad luck? If it was a good outcome, did you make the best decision in getting that outcome? Or did you have some good luck on your side? You got lucky. And finally, what ties into this is this concept of resulting. Has anyone ever heard of the concept of resulting? So resulting is the concept of analyzing your decisions based on the outcome. So basically what we're talking about with luck and skill, we do it to ourselves and we do it to other people. So here's an example. You've got a person who has been working at this job. They've been there 15 years. They have a steady salary, but they are convinced that they want to go start their own company, and they're going to join the Preccelerator, and they are going to get investors, and the market is good for this product, and they've looked at everything, and their partner has a salaried position that's pretty stable, and if they went out on their own, they would have a good book of business already to start. And they want to be an entrepreneur. They don't want to stay at this job where there's no growth. And then they make the decision, they get cold feet, and they decide to stay at their job. Okay, they're going to stay at the salary job. They're not going to go with their Preccelerator contract. They're not going to pursue invest. Oh, by the way, they also had an investor who was very interested and gave a verbal commitment. But he's like, no, you know what? I'm just going to take a breath and wait. The pandemic hits. Okay. He finds out that the investors were no longer investing after the pandemic hit. The Preccelerator shut down for a little bit, which it didn't. It's just a scenario. That the market wasn't doing as well. And all of a sudden, this was something that would not survive in the COVID world that we like now. So did he make a good decision to not go forward with starting this company?
Well, based on the outcome, probably yes. Right? Can you hear me?
No one? Come on, I gotta hear one person.
Sari, can you hear any of us? Sari?
On the back end, he was able to keep his job. His partner had lost her job. Oh my God, what if he had started this job and she lost her job and he had started this new company and he was having very little income? So the answer is he had all this data at his fingertips, right? He had all this information, and the information was saying, go forth and prosper and start this company. The fact that the pandemic hit and all these other things happened to him that would not have allowed the same success that was anticipated, it doesn't matter. It does matter, obviously. It matters because of the outcome, and you don't want to have a bad outcome. But when you're just going back and saying, would I have made the same decision Well, that was a streak of bad luck. So the point is that you can make the best decisions using data, and that you're not going to have the same outcome every time. You're not going to have the best outcome every time. But in life, in business, on the long run, if you can continue making the best decisions with data, then you are going to have better outcomes. So I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you to those who were not eating lunch and participated.
I want to thank you all for participating in our workshop today, and we will look forward to our future workshops